It's 2005. You have a flip phone for calls and a dedicated iPod for music. Apple has already changed the world with its digital music player, but they haven't quite conquered the phone market yet. Motorola, on the other hand, is still riding high on the success of the Razr, which was universally recognized as the sleekest phone on the planet. Two titans, two innovators, were coming together to try and make history. This historic partnership was supposed to usher in the future of mobile entertainment. It was the moment everyone believed the iPod would finally be put inside your phone for good. Instead, this promising collaboration became one of the most embarrassing technology scandals of the decade and a lesson in corporate sabotage and strategic miscalculation. We are diving deep today into the story of the Motorola ROKR E1, a device that should be remembered as the iPhone's deeply awkward, fundamentally disastrous older brother. Welcome back to Tech Fails, the channel where we regularly excavate the digital graveyards of innovation to find out exactly what went wrong and why. Before the iPhone was even a sketch, Steve Jobs knew the mobile phone posed an existential threat to Apple's primary cash cow. It was a Trojan horse designed, in his mind, to ultimately kill the incredibly lucrative iPod. If customers could simply carry one device that handled both their calls and their music library, there was no logical reason to carry two separate gadgets. Apple had to get into the phone market quickly. However, they decided they weren't quite ready to build a phone entirely themselves. They first sought out a corporate partner, a willing vehicle to carry the precious and important iTunes software. Enter Motorola. They were the undisputed kings of cool phone design and massive sales volume at the time. Their Razr V3 was a global cultural phenomenon that was flying off the shelves. The partnership, on paper, felt like an absolute slam dunk for both companies. The marketing campaign was enormous, featuring massive global stars like Madonna and professional skateboarder Tony Hawk. The world was absolutely ready, and perhaps desperate, for the device that the two companies were proudly calling the iTunes phone. The stage was set for greatness. What the world actually received, however, was a total catastrophe. The ROKR E1 is a classic textbook example of a camel designed by a committee. This device was so fundamentally compromised by internal corporate politics and completely competing interests that it was essentially DOA, dead on arrival, upon its release. This isn't just an ordinary story about a simple failed project that underperformed expectations. This is the crucial, pivotal story about exactly why Steve Jobs finally realized he had to go it completely alone. The Motorola ROKR E1 was officially announced in September 2005. The hype train leading up to this event was thundering, and expectations were sky high. But from the very first moment Steve Jobs pulled the phone out of his pocket at the launch event, the atmosphere shifted and something felt profoundly off. Jobs looked genuinely and visibly unenthusiastic about the product he was presenting to the world. He clearly referred to it as another thing, signaling that it was a secondary act. The main reason for his lukewarm attitude and obvious hesitation was, ironically, the key element holding the ROKR's immediate failure in place. The ROKR E1, to put it politely, was a snooze. It was definitively not a sleek, cutting-edge new design built for the future. It was simply a glorified reskin of Motorola's aging E398 feature phone platform. The device was chunky, it was plasticky, and it featured a sluggish, low-resolution screen. Next to the Razr, which was the height of mobile fashion even though it was already a year old, the ROKR looked like a true relic from an earlier age. The hardware was already squarely on the path to becoming a sunset product the very day it was officially released to the public. It felt old before it was new. But the truly soul-crushing and primary problem wasn't even the dated hardware, which was merely the casing. The fundamental issue lay within the crucial iTunes software itself. This massive software problem is an issue that can be traced directly and unequivocally back to Apple's overarching strategic fear of product cannibalization. We now need to talk about the disastrous and infamous 100 song limit. This feature, or lack thereof, is the true core of the ROKR E1 technology scandal. Imagine you were an excited customer for this new phone with iTunes built in. You naturally envision carrying your entire multi-thousand song library on one convenient device. The original iPod, which was released way back in 2001, proudly promised customers 1,000 songs in your pocket. 4 years later, the ROKR E1 promised 200 songs, 100 songs. This limit remained absolute, no matter how large of a memory card a customer installed inside the phone. The core iTunes software was deliberately hard-coded to completely stop syncing any new music after the 100th song had been loaded. This was not a technical or technological limitation that could be fixed. It was a strict and clear corporate mandate handed down by Apple management. The primary reason for this crippling limitation was fear. Jobs and Apple were deeply afraid of losing iPod sales to this new partner device. On the very same day the ROKR E1 was officially launched, Steve Jobs also unveiled the stunning iPod Nano. This ridiculously thin, iconic music player was an instant design triumph. The iPod Nano was the clear future of the dedicated music player market. Apple simply could not, and absolutely would not, allow their partnered phone to compete directly with their new in-house cash cow. The ROKR was therefore intentionally and purposefully crippled to protect sales of the iPod Nano. This became a phenomenal example of a company intentionally sabotaging its own partner's product for its own gain. The result of this policy was an immediate, strong, and visceral backlash from both the media and disappointed consumers across the globe. The ROKR E1 was instantly and mockingly called the slowest iPod ever made, and derided as a compromised experience by nearly every major publication. People were not just disappointed by the final product. They were absolutely angry that Apple had delivered a solution that was actively and demonstrably worse than what they already owned. The ROKR E1 was quickly turning into a commercial and critical historical technical disaster built entirely upon poor design choices and corporate penny pinching. The 100-song limit was certainly the major headline, but the overall ROKR user experience was genuinely rotten down to its very core. The phone's operating system was Motorola's standard, notoriously clumsy feature phone OS. The iTunes software ran as a slow, separate, and clunky application within this environment. Navigating the music library, even the limited 100 songs, was an agonizingly slow process. It was prone to freezing and felt completely counterintuitive to users. This experience was completely jarring compared to the silky smooth, responsive scroll wheel interaction that defined a dedicated iPod. Furthermore, if you received a phone call while you were listening to music, the device would often struggle to switch functions properly. This regularly led to frustrating delays or even dropped calls. The transfer speed was another major point of user pain. Remember those precious 100 songs? Getting them onto the phone was a technological ordeal in itself. The ROKR E1 only used the ancient and painfully slow USB 1.1 connection standard for syncing. For context, the iPod had been utilizing the much faster USB 2 for several years by this time. Transferring those full 100 files, even if they were small, could easily take well over 10 minutes, sometimes much longer. This felt like an eternity for a device promising seamless music integration. This sluggish process completely broke the essential promise of effortless interaction that the iTunes ecosystem was supposed to represent. The storage was another issue. When the ROKR first launched, it typically came bundled with a truly tiny 512 megabytes micro SD card. While the arbitrary song limit was 100, even getting to 100 high-quality MP, 3 songs on such a small memory card was often a stretch for users. This was in an era when flash storage was still relatively expensive, and Motorola was clearly keen on not subsidizing larger, more capable cards. The ROKR was, from top to bottom, a budget and compromise experience that was deceptively dressed up in Apple's attractive, premium brand name. The Motorola ROKR E1 officially died a quiet, unmourned death sometime in 2006. It was universally regarded as a flop, a corporate punchline, and a massive disappointment to absolutely everyone involved. But its commercial failure was not actually the end of this story. In fact, it was the necessary and essential beginning of the next story. Steve Jobs reportedly loathed the ROKR E1 with a passion. He viewed it as undeniable proof that outsourcing critical innovation meant accepting painful compromises to the user experience. The ROKR E1 was the final, clear piece of evidence he needed to finally confirm his deepest conviction. If Apple truly wanted to create a great mobile music device, they had to build the phone entirely themselves. Motorola had dutifully provided the phone, the hardware, and the manufacturing expertise. And in doing so, they had created a piece of technological junk that seriously undermined Apple's own software. The entire ROKR project validated the idea that Apple absolutely needed complete end-to-end control over the product. They simply couldn't trust partners to deliver the quality and seamless integration that defined the Apple brand. The ROKR E1 taught Apple three absolutely critical lessons that directly fueled and shaped the subsequent development of the iPhone. First, no limits. A proper music device must hold all your music, not just a paltry 100 songs. Second, hardware is software. The user interface must be fast, intuitive, and genuinely beautiful. It couldn't just be a slow, layered application on top of a clumsy operating system. Third, control everything. The very best and most successful products only come from a single, unified vision that controls the hardware, the software, the interface, and the surrounding ecosystem. The Motorola ROKR E1 is not just another forgotten feature phone in history. It stands today as a monument to corporate miscommunication and a paralyzing fear of direct market competition. It is a textbook, spectacular technology scandal where a major company deliberately handicapped its own partner's product to protect its existing core revenue stream. For Motorola, the ROKR E1 was sadly the first in a major series of missteps that ultimately led to the sad decline of their once dominant mobile phone business. They fundamentally missed the mark on the smartphone transition. For Apple, the ROKR E1's dramatic and total failure was ironically the greatest gift they could have ever received. It provided the necessary clarity, the internal motivation, and the final corporate mandate to completely pivot their entire mobile strategy. When Steve Jobs took the stage in January 2007 to finally unveil the iPhone, he started by saying, "This is a day I've been looking forward to for 2.5 years." That time frame, 2.5 years, started right around the exact moment he had to hold up the embarrassing ROKR E1 and try to pretend it was the glorious future. The iPhone went on to become an unprecedented revolution. The ROKR E1 remains an important historical reminder that even the biggest and best companies can produce an absolute technology disaster when they compromise on their core vision. It's a critical chapter in the foundational book of tech history, the very awkward, chunky book that frustratingly had a 100-song limit imposed upon it. That's all for this detailed episode of Tech Fails. If you remember the ROKR, or if you were one of the poor souls who actually bought one, please let us know your pain in the comments below. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you absolutely don't miss our next deep dive into a sunset product that truthfully should have stayed in the dark. See you next time.